Time to take a walk down memory lane and talk to you guys about my very first calorie deficit that I completed way back in 2024. Exactly January 10th, 2024 is when my entire fitness journey and my consistent daily walking journey first started. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how I lost just over 35 pounds to cut from 25% body fat all the way down to 9.7% body fat in a little over 6 months. And I'm going to break it down exactly how I did this while walking over 20,000 steps each day, including the lessons learned and all of the mistakes that I made along the way. And trust me, I made plenty of those. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's get right into it. I remember it like it was only yesterday, January 10th, 2024. I had actually gone to Walmart a day before. I think it was a Tuesday. Basically went in the middle of a work day and purchased a heavy ass box of Bowflex adjustable dumbbells. You know, they're adjustable from anywhere from 5 pounds to I believe 52.5 pounds, and I got them to actually start working out at home through a combination of these adjustable dumbbells and of course some body weight exercises like push-ups, sit-ups, etc. So I went to Walmart on the 9th, got that heavy ass box of Bowflex dumbbells, and I remember it being exceptionally heavy because I could barely get it into my shopping cart. I was even asked if I needed any help to carry it to my car. I was that skinny and that weak. Well, technically skinny fat. I got the Bowflex dumbbells, started working out the very next day. And what I did was a total body workout. So I remember looking at some exercises online using those Bowflex dumbbells. I used to do like a 5-minute stretch routine. And then after this 5-minute stretch routine, I immediately got into doing my total body workout. Basically doing the double dumbbell lifts for my chest. So basically a variation of a bench press like on a yoga mat. Then I did chest flies. I did walking lunges for the legs. I even did a goblet squat. Basically grabbed one of those dumbbells and did squats. And I did overhead shoulder press. So there are a number of exercises that went into that total body routine. And again, it was mostly exercises that I had done some research and actually looked up prior on YouTube. I was actually working out every single day at that point. So I would do exercises with the adjustable dumbbells on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, even on Sunday. So I didn't even take any rest days on the weekends. I was doing body weight exercises like push-ups, sit-ups, hanging leg raises, you name it. So I did about a 60-minute routine with the adjustable dumbbells 3 days a week, and then another 60-minute routine with the body weight exercises. So that was the first step, doing resistance training. The second step of my fitness journey was actually increasing the amount of walking that I had already been doing. So before January 2024, I had actually been walking just 10,000 steps every single day. So I had been walking over 10K steps for the second half of 2023. So from about after June of 2023 all the way to December, I was walking almost every single day. Notice I said almost every single day. I wasn't very consistent at walking 10,000 steps, aka I wasn't building up a streak of walking 10K steps day after day after day, but on average I was creeping up above 10K steps. Sometimes I even had some 14, 15K step days. At that point, I was not consistent enough to start crossing into the 20K range, but I had at least started to walk. But anyway, this was even before I started the resistance training in January. So I was still skinny fat, I was still tired, exhausted, you name it. When January came around, and this was not a New Year's resolution. I had actually experienced some losses in the family. I lost my mom a couple of months ago. I was basically a few weeks away from getting my divorce finalized, incidentally on the 22nd. And I'll talk about exactly what happened on the 22nd, that very same day. But in terms of steps, that same week, and it might have been a day before, the same day I went to Walmart and grabbed the Bowflex dumbbells, I started to push myself to walk over 20,000 steps every single day. And I did it through a combination of outdoor walking, so walks that I did early in the morning, walks that I did throughout the day with the doggies, taking them outside in the backyard. This was still when I lived in Palm Bay, Florida. And then also walking around my house. So I had this 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom rental home, which was, for me and my 2 dogs, practically a mansion. So I had plenty of space to maneuver myself around, and I did a bunch of walking around the living room, the empty rooms that I had in the house. So I was walking practically throughout the day. I had a couch, and that couch was basically reserved for my 2 doggies, right? That's basically where they spend most of their day, napping, sitting, etc. So after a while, that couch became worn out pretty fast. So obviously, I stopped using that couch altogether. So when I stopped using that couch, suddenly, instead of sitting down to watch TV, to watch movies, to play even video games on my PS4, I instead just walked around my living room or walked around my TV to watch, to stream, to play video games. At that time, I was still sitting to eat my meals, but I did follow one of Thomas DeLauer's walking tricks without, knowing subconsciously. And after each meal, I would immediately get up and start walking around, either in my living room, or if it wasn't blisteringly hot outside, if it wasn't just sweltering and just boiling outside, I would actually go out in the backyard and do a 10-minute walk there, or even around the neighborhood. So that January of 2024 is when I really started to push myself and brought my daily walking average to above 20,000 steps a day. So that was step number 2, essentially increasing my pretty sedentary activity level from 10K steps and still staying skinny fat to walking over 20,000 steps and getting that initial 500 daily calorie deficit through increasing my activity level. Still, I needed to make headway and needed to make tremendous progress when it came to my diet, because this was my first time living solo dolo, just me and the 2 doggies. So initially, when I moved to Palm Bay in 2023, that was also around the same time I started walking over 10K steps a day. I was doing a lot of delivery. I was ordering out a lot of food through Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, but I was still trying to eat healthy, I was ordering salads from Tropical Smoothie Cafe, or even little subs, like 6-inch subs, while keeping mostly veggies on those subs. But of course, I still didn't track actively my calories, macronutrients, micronutrients. That all changed that same January when I started cooking all of my meals. And initially what I did was, the only thing that made sense to me and what it seemed easy for me to cook on a daily basis was salmon. So I started to get like sockeye salmon and Atlantic salmon from the Publix, and I was just cooking it with a bunch of different vegetables. And I tried it all: arugula, spinach, kale. I even had like mixed nuts. I was buying on a pretty consistent basis for an extra fat source in my meals. So basically, my first meal always looked like Greek yogurt with some mixed nuts and protein powder. This is also the very first time in my life that I started to buy whey protein powder. And in fact, from 2024 to present day, my go-to protein powder brand is that Optimum Gold Standard protein powder brand. I think I've cycled through like the chocolate flavor, the vanilla flavor, and now I eat the strawberry flavored whey protein powder. But anyway, first meal of the day, just starting off as a novice cook for myself, was eating Greek yogurt, whey protein powder, berries, and some mixed nuts. Then breakfast is usually 3 eggs at the time, 3 eggs with some vegetables and avocado. Lunch was always salmon, veggies, avocado once again. You're starting to see a pattern. And then dinner was actually 0 meat sources. In fact, I think the only animal, or I guess you can call it an animal protein source, but it was essentially cottage cheese, avocado, and veggies. And total calories at that point was about 1,700 or 17 to 1,800 calories max is what I was eating at that time. So I was in a severe calorie deficit. I don't even think I bothered to check my maintenance calories, subtract 500 from that, and just start my calorie deficit at that level. If I would have just calculated my maintenance calories using any free calorie calculator out there, I probably would have started my calorie deficit by A, eating a lot more and thus consuming a lot more protein, and B, I would not be losing muscle as fast as I initially was, because obviously I lost a ton of water weight in the beginning. Very first calorie deficit, so you're going to lose a ton of water weight, but also probably lost a lot of muscle too. And to add on to that, I had recently increased my daily steps from 10K steps to 20, 21K steps every single day. So yeah, I was losing some fat, but definitely lost a ton of muscle too, even initially in my calorie deficit. So started cooking my meals, and then around the 22nd of January is when I started to track my meals and enter each of the meals that I was cooking for myself and consuming 4 times a day. So that was, of course, via MyFitnessPal. I started to log meal number 1, breakfast, lunch, dinner on a daily basis. I essentially built a logging streak into MyFitnessPal. And then, in fact, I was actually taking a look at my diary, my food diary from January 2024, and the first entry was on January 22nd, 2024, which was incidentally when I officially became single again. After 9 years of being married, that's when I officially got the notice from the court, from the judge, that I was single. And to this day, not interested at all in mingling with anybody. But anyway, so January 22nd is when I started to log each and every one of my meals, and that's something that I would recommend for you all not to wait on. If you guys start resistance training, if you start increasing your steps at the start of your journey, at the same exact time, I want you to start logging your meals and ideally cooking each of your meals. Because it's only when you start cooking your meals and preparing your meals that you can actually keep track of exactly what you're eating on a daily basis. You know exactly how much salt you're putting in your meals, what types of condiments you're using in your meals, and overall the weights and the calorie content of each of your food items. Because yes, I even invested in the kitchen skills. I started weighing those pieces of salmon, weighing that serving of cottage cheese, serving of arugula, kale, spinach, you name it. So January is basically when all of those things started to fall into place. Regular resistance training at home, number 1. Then doing the 20K steps a day, number 2. And then number 3, cooking my meals and subsequently logging them into MyFitnessPal. So around March is when I was fully dialed into my resistance training routine, and in fact it was after I got into a groove with my resistance training routine, and during one of those routines that it basically appeared in my mind as a sort of epiphany moment that I needed to go for a trip, take a break. Maybe I was starting to get a little tired from this routine that I developed, or perhaps I needed a little break from work. But my first solo trip is when I ventured out to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, specifically Copacabana, Brazil, in March of 2024. And I remember that trip being a very important juncture, especially early on in my fitness journey, because even while I was traveling through Rio de Janeiro and walking from restaurant to restaurant, grocery store to grocery store, I was still very conscious about what I was eating. And I was very conscious about hitting my 21, 22 steps by the end of each day. I remember even when I was traveling to Brazil, instead of waiting in the gate area for my flight to arrive, instead of sitting there waiting with everybody else, I actually decided to walk around that gate or walk around the entire length of that terminal. And that would ensure that I was hitting, or at least I was surpassing 13,000 steps before I even stepped on the plane. And then by the time I arrived at my connecting destination, I was trying my best to knock out 20,000 steps before I boarded my second flight, because from where I was in Florida at the time, there wasn't a direct flight to Rio de Janeiro. I still had to take a connection. I believe I was connecting through, might have been Bogota, Colombia. So I was taking Avianca. I remember my first flight was with Avianca from Orlando to Bogota, and then from Bogota to Rio de Janeiro, which actually made an emergency landing in Curitiba because someone actually got sick. So I think I've told this story before, but yeah, we made an emergency landing. But luckily, even before I stepped onto that second flight, I had already successfully passed 20,000 steps, literally by walking around the gate area and across the entire length of the terminal. So, around July 2025, or even before July 2025, I immediately started to see huge progress, not only on the weight scale, but also in my overall body composition. I started to see those abs start coming in. The first row of abs, the second row of abs, basically the rectus abdominis muscle was becoming more and more defined, more and more toned, and the obliques were also coming in nicely because I was doing those hanging leg raises, I was doing sit-ups, I was doing crunches, weighted crunches as well, Russian twists with the 2 dumbbells. But as I had mentioned, I had lost a ton of muscle along the way. One of the reasons for why I was losing a lot of muscle was because first I had actually started at a very, very low calorie level. I was eating in January around 1800 calories. Eventually, I learned what worked for me was eating at least 200 grams of protein. And when I had started my calorie deficit, I was only eating 152 grams of protein. I'm obviously a very strong responder to a high protein diet. So 152 grams of protein was not enough for me to sustain daily resistance training. So as a result, I actually increased the amount of protein. And it might have been around the time I flew out to Brazil that I started to eat a lot more meat. I transitioned from just eating salmon, cottage cheese, and eggs to 6 eggs, salmon, chicken breast, chicken thighs, whatever was available, basically anything coming from a chicken, and then of course ground beef. I became a fanatic, a fan. To this day, I remain a fan of lean ground beef, and I've had all sorts of variants of that. 85-15, 91-9, 93-7, and even when I was trying to get to my leanest, a 96-4 extremely lean ground beef that I was getting from Aldi on a weekly basis. So coming back to July 2025, I reached my leanest physique. I managed to cut all the way down to 9.7% body fat, which means for me at that time, at my lowest, I was at around 121.8 pounds. So I started the deficit in January around 157 and ended up losing over 35 pounds and getting down to 121.8 pounds or 9.7% body fat. So that was my leanest level. I don't think I've ever cut down even further than that, 9.7%, because once again, lost a ton of muscle along the way. because I was cutting calories fast and furiously. This means that instead of just waiting for the fat loss plateau to kick in every month, which is going to happen for those of you who are in a calorie deficit, you're going to reach that dreaded fat loss plateau on multiple occasions. But instead of being patient and sticking with the process, I instead started cutting calories pretty fast. So every time I reached one of these fat loss plateaus, aka anytime I saw my average weight stall and I saw that I had actually lost 0 pounds on the weight scale for that given week, the next week I would decrease my daily calories by 100. So if I was at 2,000 the next week, after seeing 0 pounds on the scale or 0 pounds change on the scale, I would decrease or subtract 100 from 2,000. So now the following week I was eating 1,900 calories. Pretty soon I started to do that preemptively. I was thinking I need to cut down to below 10% body fat, which was my target at the time, as fast as humanly possible. So as a result, even before I saw the weight stall, I started to cut calories. So eventually I was eating towards the end of my calorie deficit on average anywhere from 1,700 to 1,600 calories. Of course, I was keeping the protein amount around the same, around 200 grams, but I was significantly cutting back on carbs and fat. So I can only imagine that by the time I reached 9.7% body fat, not only did I look smaller, skinnier and scrawnier, but I probably was very, very low on probably across the board on all of the hormones, just like testosterone, for example, probably at my lowest level at that point. So that is what happened because of cutting calories very quickly. I actually ran into some family members at the time and they thought I had some sort of chronic disease because I looked so skinny, so emaciated by the end of that calorie deficit. Of course, no one can actually see your six-pack abs when you have all your clothes on. It's only when you take off your shirt that people realize that, hey, you're actually, shredded. But that wasn't my case. So after July 2025, I went on a lean bulk and I actually bulked up pretty quickly because suddenly I started to pack on the carbs, started eating more carbohydrates, right, while keeping my protein level around the same. So I gained weight pretty fast, and that freaked me out. So as a result of that, I actually returned and did another calorie deficit. So that's why I've done 3 calorie deficits in all. So 2 calorie deficits since that initial one. So the first one got me to 9.7% body fat. The second one, at my leanest, I got down to 10.5. And then as of this year, I got all the way down to 11.9, 11.8%, before once again I went on that dreaded lean bulk. So here's what I would immediately recommend. First of all, do not do what I did. Every time you reach a fat loss plateau, aka you don't see the weight change on your weight scale for a week or even longer, do not be worried about that. Don't pay attention to the weight on the scale. In fact, I would pay more attention to your energy level. I would pay more attention to your actual appearance in the mirror. And then, of course, your weight circumference as well. So keep tracking that. Keep measuring that with like a measuring tape. And essentially just measure your weight circumference on a weekly basis instead of fixating so heavily on the number that you see on the weight scale, or even the number that you see on a body fat scale. So I was using a fit index scale, which is a smart body fat scale, throughout my calorie deficit, and I continue to use that on a daily basis. But it's only an approximation, right? It's probably best at telling you what your weight is. It'll give you some indication of whether or not you're experiencing some water retention, your BMI, and all of that stuff. But in general, lean body mass and body fat percentages are at best approximations given by the fit index body fat scale. It's definitely not something that's reliable or as reliable as a DEXA scan. So that's why once you reach your ideal body fat percentage, maybe it's 10%, then I would strongly recommend going out to get a DEXA. But what I would recommend is anytime you see a fat loss plateau, don't slash calories. Instead, increase your activity level. And this is something that I waited way too long to actually carry out. I was probably around 22,000 steps for the majority, if not the entirety, of that calorie deficit. So from January 2024 all the way to July 2024, I was cutting calories like a madman, but I stayed at the exact same daily step goal or daily step average. So this is one of the reasons why I always advocate against having a step target, because it's going to cause you to get your foot off the accelerator and it's going to make you walk less. Instead, just have a step minimum. If I thought about 22,000 steps a day as my minimum, then I would have been pushing myself harder every single day, even throughout my calorie deficit. Instead of staying at 22,000 steps a day for weeks, months on end, I would have easily gone over 23, 24, 25,000 steps, just like I was pushing myself with my total body workouts. I should have done the exact same thing on my daily walking. This is one of the reasons why I've been walking over 20,000 steps, or I had been walking over 20,000 steps for 2 years in a row. So 2025 and all of 2024, I was averaging over 23,000 steps. I think I finally got over 25K, 26K steps average on a daily basis late last year. So it was only when I realized that I needed to be more conservative about calories and conserve as much calories as possible, and instead increase my activity level, is when I started to retain more muscle. So that is the biggest mistake that I made, namely sacrificing calories and not increasing my activity level, and also waiting too long to increase my protein. I was listening to all of this hype, all of this fear mongering around or over consumption of protein. Protein makes you fat. Don't eat too much protein. It's going to cook your kidneys. At one point this year, I actually stepped down the amount of protein I was eating. You know what happened? The food cravings came roaring back. I started to get hungrier because I had become used to eating over 200 grams of protein. At times during that calorie deficit, and even the calorie deficit that I had last year, I was approaching on days over 300 grams of protein, and I felt great. My kidneys are still fully functioning. I have normal kidney function, which I confirmed this year on a couple of blood tests already. So lesson learned is going to be that a calorie deficit is going to be your biggest weapon and your biggest tool in your quest to cut down to your leanest physique, and obviously to your lowest visceral fat level, while still staying in the healthy range. You obviously want to be around 3 for visceral fat if you can manage it. Normally the range for visceral fat is from 0 to 6 is a healthy range. 6 to 11 is like acceptable. 11 to 14 is high, and then anything over 15 is considered to be excessive levels of visceral fat. So you want to be smack dab in the middle of the healthy range, which would be around 3. And at my lowest, at my leanest physique at 9.7% body fat, I got down to a visceral fat level of 2, which is totally not required. If you can hit 4 or 3, you would be perfectly fine, and that would basically decrease your risk for most chronic diseases, especially those that fall under the umbrella of metabolic syndrome. So this is exactly how I completed my first calorie deficit at the start of my fitness journey in 2024 through 3 go-to mechanisms. Regular resistance training. You don't have to do daily resistance training like I did. Just 3 days a week of lifting weights is more than enough. High volume daily walking, not walking 30,000 steps one day and hardly walking the next day, basically building a step streak, maintaining a daily walking average. For me, it was 20,000. That was more than enough for me to reach my desired body fat percentage. And then finally, cooking your meals, tracking your meals, and staying in that calorie deficit for as long as humanly possible. And don't jump to slash calories so fast. Just increase your activity level approximately by 1,000 steps every single month. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Let me know where you guys are currently in your fitness journey or even your daily walking journey. And until next time, just walk, baby.